What's up, guys? Jason up, New 80s Revolution here, live with, I've got to collect myself. The nerves are going. I am not a professional interviewer. I am a fan of the 80s. I am a fan of 80s wrestling. You guys all know that. That's why you're a subscriber to the channel. But as you can see, I am sitting here with one of the pioneers of 80s NWA wrestling, okay, or 80s wrestling in general. The memories of WTBS, the memories of 605. We're talking about Ric Flair. We're talking about Dusty Rhodes. We're talking about Arn Anderson. We're talking about the Four Horsemen. But sitting here with me, we are talking about, again, one of the pioneers of 80s NWA wrestling, Magnum TA. Sir, thank you for joining us. How are you?
Oh, I am doing splendid. And to hear those kind of accolades and feel like I contributed to something that I love and I had a passion for from the time I was, or earliest memories of television. I was a fan myself, so to have given back something that's been remembered is special for me too.
You've done countless shoot interviews. That's kind of a thing, especially with YouTube. Companies like High Spots, things like that. You've done shoot interviews. I've seen the interviews. And when I watch those interviews, honestly, like I was telling you before we went on, I get bored with them because the question and answer format is kind of the same thing every time. And when I got the opportunity to talk to you, I wanted to come across as a fan, and I wanted to approach this Q&A from a fan's perspective, and dare I say, from a Mark's perspective. So this is going to be a little bit of a different experience for you. I'm
in. Let's
All right. Good. So the first thing I want to talk to you about, and I think a lot of people have questions about this. Like I told you before, I grew up watching WWF. I grew up in New York. I live in New York. And so we had a ton of WWF programming available to us. I was an early cable subscriber around 84. So I was getting all the WWF programming. And I was drawn to that cartoony superhero kind of thing, right? And those cards, those matches were held in front of large crowds, larger arenas. And then I stumbled a little down the dial and I found TBS around 1984, 1985. And that's how I first discovered NWA World Championship Wrestling. And that's how I discovered you. So the number one thing I wanted to ask you when I got this time with you was the TBS studios. Okay, that was such a different look. It was such a different concept. Small. I mean, we can't even call it an arena. I think it was backstage at a studio. Small crowd, tiny environment. What was that like? What was it like? With that totally different presentation? It seemed like a special time. What was the atmosphere like at TBS Studios?
Well, I knew the impact the viewership had. So the venue in which we did it really didn't even factor in my thinking. Because for me, television was always a means to let the fan know what you were about, get to know you, get invested in you, understand why you felt the way you did about things, what your struggles were, the things you were trying to overcome. So I'd always been involved in regional promotions, Mid-South, Florida Championship Wrestling, the Pacific Northwest, and places where we just reached, a couple states at most. So all of a sudden to be on this thing that reached not only across the country, but really across the globe was a huge impact for me, that I realized we were impacting and reaching, 10 times, tenfold the people, or maybe 100-fold the people that we'd ever been able to see, who we were, what we were all about, and and see our craft. So the little intimate setting, I didn't ever look down on it or think, this is beneath us, because I was looking at the big picture, but it was the impact of what we were doing with it.
You talk about the intimate setting. That's the word, intimacy. When we're talking, look, I'm estimating just by looking at the product on television, we're talking maybe 75 to 80 fans.
No, not even that many.
Not even.
Not even.
But the I heard those fans more than I hear an arena full of fans. That was some of the most passionate fans that came up with chants before chants were popular in wrestling. Those fans were a big part of the product, weren't they?
Oh, absolutely. And everything to do with it is an integral part, from the fan to the referee to the announcers. You know, we can't do anything we do without all those interactions working together and everybody playing their part. If the people aren't being entertained, if they're not getting invested into us and feeling the struggle and getting with it, then we're not, we're not doing our job. We were having huge reactions when we did our syndicated programming for Jim Crockett Promotions.
Yes.
We'd wrestle typically in front of anywhere from 800 to 1,500 people, and oh my gosh, it was like, talk about sound effects. I mean, if you went boo, they went with you. I mean, you didn't have to do anything to exaggerate anything, because they were so into the product that they made the sound effects for us. And it didn't matter if you had, to your point, 50 to 75 people, or if you had 1,500, 2,000 people. It was just more of the same amplification of the same thing.
Was that same studio used for Georgia Championship Wrestling in 81, 82, 83?
Yes.
Okay.
Same little set. Where Gordon Soley was all those years.
Right. So what was the atmosphere like? I mean, did you guys even have dressing rooms?
The bulk of the guys dressed in, there was like 2 small dressing room type areas, and Dusty and I and a handful of us, we actually took over people's desks in cubicles. I remember I changed to somebody's cubicle every time I ever went to television. Of course, I never wrestled on TV more than a minute, 2 minutes. Wasn't like I really broke a sweat, so it wasn't that big of a deal. But it was not your typical sport environment type atmosphere. To your point, there was a control room. You walk right through that control room out of a sliding glass door that had a curtain in front of it, and bam, you were there.
Were they? Is that where CNN was also filmed?
No, CNN was in this was on Peachtree. This was a Peachtree DeKalb or something. I can't remember the exact address, but it was a little small studio. CNN was actually in the towers.
Gotcha. Okay.
So that's where we ended up having the offices later on when they got bought out.
I love the visual of you guys changing in somebody's cubicle, because, were the shows actually filmed on a Saturday?
Saturday mornings. Yeah, we would fly. We'd get a red eye in from wherever we were before we had the jets, and come in there and be there. We'd film the one for the first thing Saturday morning, the 10 o'clock show that they saw on Saturday mornings. And then of course the 6:05 and the 7:05, and then the Sunday night show. They made a tape version of all that together for Sunday nights. Gotcha. And then we flew off and wrestled somewhere that evening after we did all that in the morning.
Yeah, there were a couple of syndicated shows. You guys did NWA Worldwide, I believe, yeah. And that was in front of more of an arena style crowd.
Yeah, and it was always a venue that would hold usually like 2,000, 1,500 to 2,000, maybe 2,500 people, and we'd advertise a couple dark matches to help again draw that crowd in, so they would know they were going to see a main event type match, not just a bunch of TV, quick, hustling type matches that we would typically put on television. Even when we were shooting angles, you typically didn't see your big stars head to head on television back in those days.
Correct. I think one of my favorite matches was anything with Mike Jackson was a fantastic match. Rocky King, who just recently passed away, I think got a shot at Flair. So there were some fun bonus matches here on 605.
George South was the very first match I had on TBS, and George and I have been lifelong friends, and he's still wrestling to this day.
Yes,
he's got a wrestling school and just a really classy guy. But I'd never met George in my life. They introduced me to him and said, "Hey, this is Magnum." He doesn't know who Magnum is from Adam's House Cat, and he said, "Y'all are going to go do this," and it lasted 20, 30 seconds, and it was over with, and he was going like, wow, that was the easiest money ever made.
You said earlier about how your matches were pretty quick, and I assume that was just part of the build of you, of not even of your character. We can't say Magnum TA was a character, but they're building you. You're going out there, and some of the matches that I have a huge tape library, and this is back in the early '90s when this thing called tape trading was a thing. I have so much NWA footage. I have complete runs of television shows from '84 all the way to the end of Nitro. So I've seen, I think the quickest match I saw you in on 605 was probably 8 or 10 seconds. You locked up, it was belly to belly, and it was over. Why were they pushing you so fast?
Well, they were pushing me fast because first of all, they had a plan, and they were trying to create this magic around me where you had to come to the arena to see me in a serious confrontation. They gave me plenty of mic time. We shot angles, Flair and I, and different ones. I mean, we did things to entice you to come out, but Dusty never wanted you to be able to see me unless you came to the arena, mix it up with somebody like Tully or Arn or Nikita, any of the main players. They just weren't going to give that away. They wanted you to have to pay to see it.
You're wrestling in front of 40, 50 people. And then you're going to arenas, you're going to sell out huge arenas, you're doing main event style matches, you're doing 20-minute matches longer. Do you have to be in a certain mindset on TV versus in the arena?
I was always pretty much in the same mindset. I mean, to me, business was business, and it was very serious business to me. I never took it, lightly. So I was just intense about getting over and showcasing myself in 20, 30 seconds for a minute and a half, and then having that good interview to as I and of course I much more enjoyed going out in front of 10,000 people and wrestling for 30 minutes, or Flair and I went so many hour draw matches I can't even remember, 19 in 1 month. We took, so the contrast is they have me going 30 seconds a minute on TV, but then the first loop that we took around with TBS, now we'd be in the flagship show on TBS, they pitted Flair and I against each other in all the venues, and we went an hour in every one of them. We did 19 of those in 1 month. And that was to set the stage while we were marketably different than the WWE product, where Hogan was going out, walking, talking, working the crowd, doing the magic that he did, but a marketably different product in that bell time to bell time, nobody could cover what we were doing. They couldn't match it.
I agree 100%. And even as a kid, again, even as an 8-year-old kid who's attracted to the luster of the WWF at the time, again, the Hulk Hogan character, the superhero, larger than life cartoon character, of course that attracted a kid. But I knew when I was watching NWA that I was watching something different. I was watching something a lot more special. Were you guys aware that there was a big difference? But were you making the company different on purpose?
Yeah, absolutely. Dusty and I were, first of all, we were best friends besides being in this thing called wrestling together. Right. And we shared the same vision, the same dream. We came from the Eddie Graham school of wrestling, which was the legitimacy of portraying an athletic contest and a struggle and serious, a serious type confrontation. And my thing was, even if I was on the card with somebody that, maybe their work wasn't as solid as mine or whatnot, and it didn't look as legit, I wanted the people to walk out every time they saw me and know that whoever was in the ring with me, there was a battle. They might have thought, 3 or 4 of them matches, I might could have seen through some, not mine. I mean, I was rolled out to the floor. I'm in your lap. We're trading blows, sweat's flying, blood's flying. And, that was the thing that, I endeavored to do every night, not just have the biggest pops and the biggest ooh factor every night, but I wanted to make believers out of everybody, because it's just back when kayfabe was still king. Yes. And we were, living and dying by portraying this as a legitimate, athletic competition and a fight.
Living and dying by it. I've heard, I don't know what it was like from territory to territory. We've heard stories about Bill Watts, who wouldn't even let the guys book in the same hotel. How did you live kayfabe back in the day? Could you be seen at a restaurant together?
No. Oh hell, no. Yeah. No, Bill would and Bill and Eddie Graham both. I mean, all that was the lineage that came up, because you had all this time and money invested in these characters and these struggles, and if you did something to pull back the veil or unlegitimize what we were portraying, it hurt everybody. It hurt the entire business. So that's why when you heard guys back before Vince just threw the lid off of everything, there was some guys back in the late 80s, maybe early 90s that kind of popped off and did some interviews. I'm not gonna name names, but there was people that had legitimate heat, major heat, and kind of heat that would get your ass kicked for you if you ran into the right person, or Harley Race, or me, or somebody that had gone through the kind of brutal physicality we had to entertain people, and then have some guy wise off and try to be smarten up the marks. They would find themselves in a bad way.
I watched a very early interview, very early kind of these shoot style deals with Arn Anderson. And I think the interviewer asked a question that kind of crossed that line a little bit. And I think we're talking about maybe even late 90s. And Arn wasn't going to answer that question. He basically said, let's move on. Let's not answer that question. It was kind of like a backstage kind of question. Arn wasn't going there.
No, and it's still, even today, there's things you want to respect the fact that this thing we do is so misunderstood, because there's people that would just discredit everything about it if you really tried to explain to them all the nuances and everything else, and then all of a sudden they just discount it all. But you look at the physicality of somebody that's in a ballerina or a gymnast or this or that, they do all these things that they practice hours and hours and hours in choreographed fashion to do. And we're a group of guys that are, on the small side, back in my day, 220 up to 320-pound guys doing things that defy logic,
right,
and not killing each other in the process, but making it look like it, and making contact to the point where I had street fights when I was a bouncer in clubs that all paled in comparison by being in the ring with a 320-pound road warrior animal that hit you with a tackle that jarred every organ in your body, on the way down, and he wasn't even trying to hurt you. So it is the most physical, brutal form of entertainment that I've ever been part of, and we had such a mutual respect for each other that we wanted to protect the portrayal of how this thing played out, because you take away the magic. Now you can go see a movie today and all these special effects and things that they do, and it's not even Quite the same with that anymore, because it's all digitalized. There's not even stuntmen doing it. They're doing all these things completely different, and it's taken away, even though things are so amazing to look at with your eyes, it's taken some of the edge off things that were edgier back in the 70s and 80s and 90s than they are in 2022.
We're talking about the 605 show. Something different about that show, again, like I said, the television shows that I was used to, the WWF, they would have interviews, they maybe have one or two arena focused interviews per show. If it's the Boston market, we're going to hype the Boston show, etc. Your show was so different because it seemed that there were an equal amount of promos to matches on the show, but that was such a special part of the NWA TBS 605 show, were those podium interviews with Tony Schiavone, David Crockett, and you guys just, I've never seen a bad 605 interview. were those, did they just say, look, here's the deal, here's the topic, go ahead, guys, do your thing?
Well, first of all, those guys were the stick men. You know, they might give you a handoff, whatever. I mean, Dusty would, if something needed to be plugged, it would come from Dusty. Dusty would, as the creative, the booker, you know, he would tell, you know, somebody. But as far as any of the content or any of the things ways went, it was all improv all the time. I mean, we might, you know, like when Flair and I did the deal with the suit, and he gave me the suit, and I tore it up, did all that stuff.
So great.
I mean, we knew the premise of what we were going to do, but how we were going to play it out and how it was going to work. And it's just like when I left him laying in the ring and he got up and he was flipped because I thought I'd stole the belt. And I had taken the belt and just kind of slid it over to David. And David just so slyly says, "Oh, no, he didn't. It's right here. He left it for you." You know, I mean, he was so cool. I mean, people got irritated with him because he was so cool.
Yes.
David Crockett had a way, but he loved it. And he could make you. I mean, he gave me the name The Boss. He called me America's hot heartthrob. He did these little things that caught on. People, you know, picked up on it, and it helped build the brand, build the thing before. I mean, had we had the power of social media and the internet and all the things we have today, oh my goodness. I mean, we were so strong just from that broadcast. If we'd had anything else to go with it, I can't even imagine. It could have been like.
You mentioned David Crockett. He is such a special part of the show for me, especially as an adult, as I go back and watch some of this footage. David Crockett comes across as such a fan of the business. And it almost, you know, and I know this was his job and he did it perfectly, but it was almost like he wasn't smartened up to the business. David Crockett was over the top a fan. He was a fan commentator. It was so great to see that perspective.
It's his personality. Okay. It's just like Flair's on-screen persona is an over magnification of Rick. Okay. When I found what this Magnum character was all about, it was something I was very comfortable in my own skin, and it was what I could be with no reservations. You know, where I got the Superman knob, I can turn up to 100, but you got to be comfortable in that presentation. He was the same way. To your point, he loved it, and when he got excited about it, he couldn't help but spill that excitement over to the crowd, and they felt it. And it was just real. I mean, he was that genuine. If we were on an airplane or we were out to dinner or, you know, wherever we interacted, he was always the same guy. He wasn't like, you know, oh, he just, you know, sat around and a mumble mouth and kind of low key and everything. He was always enthusiastic about everything to do with the business.
Well, it still makes an impact on somebody, you know, 35 years later. I still remember David Crockett as such a huge part of that broadcast. You mentioned Nikita Koloff. Nikita comes in I think about really early '84, gets connected with Ivan Koloff. They bring in Barry Darsow, Crusher Khrushchev, both green, but obviously both learning under Ivan. And then it seemed pretty quickly you were put with Nikita, kind of the USA versus USSR thing. It's a perfect wrestling format. Your matches with him were so great, and we get this best of 7 series that you talked about earlier. But Nikita hasn't been around a while. Why are those matches so great even today?
Well, first of all, a couple of things. So this shows you how quickly things were happening. So we go on TBS after I had been with the Crockett's about 6 months. Everything pops. I have a little run around with Flair just again to set the table for what the NWA and WCW Crockett Promotions is all about. I had an 8-month feud with Tully over the U.S. title after I defeated Wahoo. We went 8 months. So when I started with Nikita in that feud, I had already been around, you know, in the Crockett world for well over a year, and he had been growing and they'd been planting seeds, and they had great plans for him, but they had to find the right niche. So the Cold War thing was such a big deal back then, and he played that thing with as much sincerity and committedness as anybody could. So he made that character so real. He was the only person really on the roster that had the kind of intensity like I had as a baby face, to where we were like a collision just waiting to happen. And of course, we played it up big, and we did all these things, and we had the best of 7 series. I knocked out Bob Geigel, the president of the National Wrestling Alliance, for insulting my mom.
Yes.
And it was just a great story, and the story would have gone on. I mean, there was never meant for Nikita and I to end and me just end up getting screwed out of the belt and then him going his merry way. The end game was me back with Flair, me having the run with the world title, and Nikita and I again, Tully and I again, Ric Flair and rematches. I mean, it was just so many, and Jimmy Garvin was the last player in the game, and he may have been one of the most talented of all of them. I don't even know where that could have gone, because he was a wild card that you never got to see his intensity, what he could have been as a heel, because him and I had just been in a program for about 6-8 weeks, and he was the last match I had when I had the crash. So yeah, amazing.
We jumped ahead a few questions here, because I was going to ask you, and you kind of answered it. You were slated to become the NWA World Champion.
Absolutely, and Rick will collaborate. I mean, it wasn't it was still the end of the era where the National Wrestling Alliance was a group, and I had that real 10 pounds of gold in my hand, and it had been decided upon with all the powers that be that I was the next guy to get to carry the torch. So that was my dream. That's all I ever wanted to be, was the best and be the world champ.
To me, the NWA process of determining a champion meant a lot more than anywhere else, because, like you said, there were the powers that be. There was from what I've understood, there was almost a board of directors that would decide who was going to be champion.
Absolutely. If they weren't all in agreement, because back then the champion would come to each of their territories. So the guys that had their specific NWA territories all had a stake in what it would be like to have that person coming representing the world championship and interacting with their champion. Because that's why Flair, they called him the 60-minute man, because he would go to all these different places around the world, and no one would want to get their champion beat, and the world champion just come in and out, beat him, leave, and they're left with a guy that got it handed to him by the world champion and didn't have a chance because it killed their business. So he did an hour. The joke was he could do an hour Broadway with a broom, because he was just so good and so entertaining that he could have classic matches with practically anyone. And for me, just in telling the story, until I had the program with Nikita, I had always been the follower. Like I'd always been in the ring with someone that had vast more experience than me, and I looked to them to lead, set the tempo, set the match the way they wanted. I mean, Wahoo McDaniel, Sully Blanchard, Ric Flair, right on down the list. And I hadn't been in the position to be what we call the ring general, the one that's really dictating the tempo, what you do, when you do, how you do it, how you control the crowd, until the program with Nikita. So some of my best body of work that I'm proud of is with Nikita, because to your point, he had less experience. He was a great partner to be out there with, because he was so intense. But I had to be the one to have the little nuances to manipulate things to get it where we wanted to be. And we had a lot of matches that were 30 and 45 minutes that we had pretty good barn burners.
Going in a little bit of a different direction, back in the day, back in the 80s, the pro wrestling magazines were kind of how a lot of people got their information. Bill Apter's magazines. There was one called Pro Wrestling Illustrated, and they had a little gimmick where they would name the sexiest wrestler of the year. And you were I believe, often the winner of the sexiest wrestler of the year. I don't know if you're a married guy right now. I don't know how much of this you can talk about. I'm assuming that you had a blast in the mid 80s.
I shouldn't still be here. Yeah, it was like being a rock star. It was the absolute craziest thing in the world, and that was part of the allure. I mean, we had Ricky and Robert that had the
Yes.
teeny bopper crowd,
Yes.
and then we had me for the 18 to 35-year-old crowd, but also the guys that thought I was a pretty tough son of a gun, that could find something admirable about what I did in the ring. And then when you put the women factor along with it, they tied it up from both angles. So they pushed that, lone wolf, kind of loneliest man in America, deal down the hilt. So they would just drive everybody crazy, and it worked. Yeah, it worked pretty good.
You mentioned the Rock and Roll Express and the teeny bopper crowd. I believe that was probably one of the best promos ever when Ric Flair talked about the training bras that the Rock and Roll Express were used to, and he's used to the real women kind of thing. Just such great stuff. And you said earlier that was really off the cuff. That was all your stuff.
Yeah, and it was always a pretty good representation of reality, because Ricky and Robert pull in, and you've got them pretty much from 11 to 15 years old losing their mind, and some of them hopefully were 16, 17, and 18, but I mean generally they look really young, and we had a different, we had the junior cadets, and then we had the full-fledged dangerous ones that the rest of us ran around with. So it gave you constantly material, because we're out, we're traveling, we're going all over the country, and there's always things spinning in your head based on things that happened that you really couldn't talk about, but it would help feed your interview and give you creative things that you could input.
Okay, so I was going to ask you about the Great American Bash. Our conversation's going along so well. I want to save a lot of time to talk about Power Town and your involvement in wrestling figures, however that happened. We'll talk about that. But I actually liked Ricky Morton as a challenger for Flair, and that's why I liked the Great American Bash, because this was a whole summer tour of pay-per-view quality shows. And what I liked about it is that they would always put a new challenger with Flair. And as a kid, I always thought, wow, this could happen. Road Warrior Hawk could become the NWA champion. Animal, Robert Gibson, Ricky Morton. One thing I remember about Ricky Morton, and again, this is all just stuff that I've heard, and how the internet tells stories. There was a program with Flair and Morton where the Four Horsemen pummeled him in a dressing room. And he came back with what appeared to be an extremely legitimate wound. And I had heard that, Ole rubbed the heck out of his face with sandpaper to make that look the way it did. Is there any truth to that?
Well, I don't know about Ricky. I know Steamboat had that experience.
Okay.
They did that. I did the same angle, and I did it to myself with a towel, and it was the most horrifying after effect of anything I've ever done. No kidding, an abrasion skin burn lasts a really long time.
It hurts for weeks.
It looks horrible. It hurts for weeks, but anyway, I think Ricky would have, the way he was, I don't think he would have had to have Ole do that. I think he would have done it himself. But about Ricky truly was one of the most amazing baby faces of all time.
Okay.
He could get a crowd by selling and fighting from the bottom up, and trying to overcome that adversity. He could get a crowd going like as good as any of the best in the business. Him and Robert had obviously an amazing run, but I'm telling you truthfully, he could have had as an amazing a run as a single, and possibly even bigger than he did as a tag team, because he's that good.
And he was the talker of the tag team. I mean, Robert Gibson.
Well, and that's the thing. And Robert is an equal worker, but Ricky had the gift of gab, and would talk and loved to do it. And Robert was just not coming out of his shell as much. And maybe he leaned on Ricky because he knew Ricky, liked to do that.
Well, another extraordinary, over the top, I couldn't even call him underrated because I don't think anybody underrates him. Bobby Eaton, another incredible in-ring guy. I honestly don't think I've ever heard Bobby Eaton's voice. He wouldn't say anything. And that we'll talk about Jim Cornette in a minute, but what are some thoughts and memories about Bobby Eaton?
Well, I got to work with Bobby and Dennis Connery countless times in Mid-South. They were Wrestling 2 and I were partners there.
Yes.
And worked this big angle with them, and then he turned on me. I mean, we crazy stuff. I got tarred and feathered one night with that's something everybody ought to have that done at least once so they can really appreciate what that's all about. Because that's a funny thing called wrestling. Nobody tells you that when you're hot and sweaty and feathers are all flying around and you're gasped and you're breathing in, you're about to suffocate because those feathers go right down your throat.
Oh my goodness.
Oh yeah, it's ridiculous. But back to Bobby. Bobby was he was so smooth, so good, so believable, and so athletic. I mean, the things he did off the top rope were second to none. And he wasn't a little guy. I mean, he was 6'2", 220, 230, and hands looked like blooming soup bones. And he could go. He was amazing talent.
Yeah, and you talk about things he did off the top rope. I don't want to hear anything about wrestling. You learn to fall. Bobby Eaton I believe his move was called the Alabama Jam. And he would jump off the top rope, a full-on laid out leg drop. I would think that he would send his tailbone through his throat every single move.
Well, when you look at like the impact of what the big leg drop that Hogan did, what it did to his back, and
right.
How many surgeries he had to have, and all the things that are repetitive, boom, boom impacts that guys did over the years. You got to think. But Bobby was so good. I know there was some point in his career where they took him up to Canada or somewhere and put him in a suit, to be like on a green screen to get digital renderings of things, moves, and things that he did before they had that kind of animation stuff to do it.
Right.
Because he could just do these crazy things, and do it over and over and over again and not kill himself. It was just nuts. I mean, there's nothing that Randy Savage could do off the top rope or anybody that I don't think he could have equaled if he wanted to.
Bobby Eaton didn't have to speak at all because he was always a part of this tag team group. Whether it was with Dennis Condrey or Stan Lane. I believe they brought Randy Rose in for some kind of a version of the Midnight Express. But there was always a voice that was representing those guys, Jim Cornette. Now, this is a guy who's got to be in his early 20s back in this time. He's a super fan. I've heard that he was a photographer at one point. You guys bring him in. You give him this mama's boy character. But he, as such a young guy, inexperienced guy, he runs with this and he turns it into some of the greatest talking ever in wrestling history.
He's a enigma. What his gift for gab and ability to insult people with just, absolutely brilliant things that he would come up with was second to none. And the energy and he was always complimented the guys he represented. It wasn't ever like he was trying to steal the limelight. He did what he did. He was the stick man. He would take the fall. He would get help get the heat, or he'd have it turned on him, whatever it took. He was the consummate professional, and very much a product of that Tennessee style, of wrestling that came out of Memphis.
Yeah.
But he was one of the very best of all time as far as guys on the mic.
Was there, you guys, I got the feeling that territories were very loyal to each other back in this particular time. Was there any interest from New York back in 1984, 1985 with you? Were you ever talking to the WWF?
No, I did not. And frankly, everybody knew that Dusty and I were like tied at the hip. And so it would have been so out of character. It would have been like us going and approaching Hogan, because
Okay.
I was their guy and Hogan was Vince's guy. And and there's some covers of Hogan and I face to face on magazines, though we never met, because people, they were starting to saliva over what that might be like, someday. And so no, I never spoke with Vince until many years after my in-ring career was over. And but he did tell me that we would have made a lot of money together.
I appreciate how open you've been with all of these answers. We talk about Magnum TA, we talk about the build, the development, what you were going to be. And then something happened. Your career was ended by a horribly tragic car accident. When I was thinking about this question, I own a mental health and addiction therapy practice. That's my career. I sit with people in a room 6-7 hours a day, and I talk about their problems. So I approach something like this a little bit differently, a little bit, because I know how traumatic this can be. We don't need to talk about the details of the accident. I think that's been covered before. Were you angry? You were going to be an NWA World Champion, and looking back at the lineage, all the names involved in that was going to be huge. You were on top of the world. You were making money. And then something happened that ended your career. Were you angry? Were you depressed? Or were you just happy to be alive after something like that?
I was in such a battle, a physical and mental battle every day from the moment that happened to find out what the best version of me I was going to be able to be after this was all over. Because I was told by the medical professional that ended up operating on me after the accident, that I had a 1,000,000-to-1 shot of ever even doing anything more than sitting up in a chair and being spoon-fed basically the rest of my life. And thankfully, I couldn't wrap my head around all the reasons why he was saying what he was saying. All I was hearing was somebody telling me something that I couldn't do. I never thought in my head that, I'm just going to make 100% comeback. I knew how bad I was hurt. But to be completely incapacitated from your neck down at 27 years old, when you've been an athlete your entire life, and that's how you've made your living, is it's going to do one or two things. It's either going to crush you, or you're just going to accept that, and this is your plight in life, or it's going to inspire you. So I had a couple of things. So first of all, it inspired me to want to prove them wrong. And secondly, I've been running at such a fast pace that I didn't realize until I stopped dead in my tracks because of this thing that happened to me, that I had this outpouring of real concern from people that I had no idea who they were. Hundreds of thousands of people are sending letters. They got security around the hospital 24/7 because they're trying to climb up the fire escapes. And it hit me that, I'd had the honor of portraying this hero, this bigger than life guy on television, and that I had, somehow weaved myself into these people's lives. So now they felt like they were fighting this fight with me too. And I really dug in and said, you got a chance now to live something truly by example, because now you got a battle that's not scripted. You don't know the outcome. Nobody, no cameras are following you around 24/7 to make this, glorified in some way, shape, or fashion. This is a battle you fight inch by inch on your own. But at the end of the day, you're going to get measured by the way you came out of this, you came through this. So my inspiration was to want to get there and maybe inspire a few people that were going to have some tough things in their life, that they could look to say, you know what, he wasn't just the talk. It wasn't just a bunch of lip service, and maybe a little bit of that character really was part of who he is and who he was, and he's applied that in his life. And looking back 35 years after the fact, and 7 children, and multiple businesses, and still working 50 hours a week at 62 years old, I guess there was a little bit more left in my tank than they thought, those medical guys that were looking down at me over their glasses saying, this is your plight in life.
Thank you for answering that. One of the most, I don't know, even as a kid, I watched when you returned at the Jim Crockett Cup, and
Baltimore.
and walked down the aisle, and I get goosebumps just talking about it. But when Dusty came out and hugged you, that was probably the most real thing I'd ever seen. I could tell from watching the show that Dusty was crying. What was that moment like for you?
I'm like you. I can remember it just like that. It was the effort that it took to get from back there backstage down there to that ring was greater than wrestling 6-hour matches back to back for me. And I just remember, these people that have cheered for me through everything, imaginable, seemed to have these superhuman battles with all the stars in the NWA back then. It was overwhelming. And to be there with my best friend, and it hadn't come full circle to the fans' perspective, but for me to come from this truly near-death experience and something that could have just completely debilitated me for the rest of my life, it was a huge win.
Are you a fan of professional wrestling today?
Absolutely. I was a fan before I wrestled. My earliest memories of television were watching Mid-Atlantic with my dad in Great Bridge, Virginia, when I was like 8 years old. And, I still watch it. And my stepdaughter, Tessa, of course, went into the business, and now she's going to be wrestling on the new programming that WOW is getting ready to put on air this fall. And she's also an executive producer on that show. So she has like come full. She's becoming, a whole nother animal behind the scenes of production and everything that goes along with, the biz. And, so yeah, I like watching what she does. And I love watching, some of my old friends. I mean, Cody's my godson, and we've had no relationship his entire life growing up, because they moved to Georgia, shortly after, my accident and whatnot. But I held him in my arms when he was christened, and I cheer for him, because I know how proud his dad would be of him, of what he's achieved and what he's done in the business. And there's just so many good stories. There's just countless ones. The business is full of people with a heart so big. It was so much to give, and some dysfunctional, and some use this business as a way to act things out in their life and deal with things and whatnot. There's all kinds of folks that make it up, just like any other business. Is just ours is like being part of the circus, and everybody gets to see it. So it's a little different, but I love the product.
I could talk to you for hours about this, but you watch the current product, and you know what? You're involved in the current product a little bit more than I guess anybody expected you to be. And the reason you and I are sitting down here talking is because I got a chance to talk with a friend of yours, Steve Rosenthal, who back when I was 8 years old, they're over here to my left, created these wrestling figures that I played with as a kid, and now he's back in the business. He's going to be producing wrestling figures, and you're a part of this company. In fact, you're in the first series of wrestling figures. There's a Magnum TA figure coming. I know that there was one from Mattel. And WWE put out, but to me, this seems a little bit more special. This is not connected to the big box stores. How did you get involved with wrestling figures?
So I get this call out of the blue. I believe it was last June, from Greg Gagne.
Yeah.
And Greg and I have known each other from 100 years. It seems like I wrestled for his dad, wrestled Flair in Kaminsky Park for his dad, and so we knew each other then. We knew each other from the WCW days when he worked as an agent there, and we kind of stayed in touch back and forth for a little bit, but hadn't talked in years and years. And so Steve had brought this idea to Greg initially about this resurrection of the wrestlers from the past, and how big nostalgia was, and the blah 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 blah. And so Greg had reached out to me, and there's a backstory that goes along with this. So I mean, Powertown is going to be an amazing, different kind of business for a couple of reasons. First of all, we're going to retell stories of the heritage and the beginnings of television with different personalities and whatnot that today's generation just doesn't know about. It's what got television, really off the ground and running. I mean, wrestling was the first, really programming type thing that was episodic, that played well on TV. Sure. And gave them something great to get people to want to tune in and look at this little box and see what's going on with it. And and that evolution, of course, has gone on and on. But there's, besides the business model of bringing back these legends to a new generation and making what they did in the history of that come alive by relaying stories and things that happened back in the day, and letting people get invested in those personalities, just like they did us when we were wrestling. We're trying to do something that will build a brand that can give back, because there's been no union for wrestling. There's been no bodybuilding 401k retirement plans. It's not like the NFL, even though like Wahoo McDaniels wasn't making the big money like they did as the NFL progressed. I mean, he got a pension from, when he turned 65 from the NFL. And that was, and a little bit here, a little bit there, it helps guys. And the wrestling business has never done anything to unite and try to kind of give back, take care of the guys that paved the way, the families. I mean, WWE has made some more efforts to do it than anyone, in that they've had legends contracts and different things that they've presented to different talents to do some things. But we're looking at a more global need, because there's a lot of folks out there that had no plan B. I mean, I was one of the fortunate ones that not only was I able to beat the odds and get back in the game of life, but I was able to pivot and find some other means of being, financially solid to be able to produce and take care of a family and do this thing called life. And so many have not been able to do that. So we're trying to create a way to create awareness, but also create a means to monetize this new awareness, whether it be with action figures or some other nuance, some other collectible, something that we can create in their likeness and generate reoccurring income, that we can start doing something for these families that are, simply not living as well as they should be, particularly for the contributions that their families had made to an industry that we all love so much. And that is the dream of mine. And we don't have the firepower that a $1 billion company has or something. But if that's our built into our model of what we do, we've got to make money and be successful to be able to help anyone do anything. But we really truly, can follow through with this and tell these stories and get, social media buzzing about, guys that, that have not ever been mainstream,
right.
The Mad Dog Vachons of this world. And,
right.
And those guys that were bigger than life, had they had the opportunity of having these mediums available to them back in the day, they'd all be superstars, in on the lips of everybody in America. It is so just many amazing stories to be told. And I think we're going to get a chance to do that on multiple levels. I think we've got a lot of really unique things in the works, and we've got a lot of folks that have stepped up and joined up and allowed us to go out and represent them. And nothing's ever happening as fast as I want. I like to wiggle my nose and make everything happen just like that. But
you only wrestled 8-second matches on TV, so you're used to being done and over with.
Yeah, and I'm like one of those fourth quarter guys. I figure I may have only 30 more years left or something. So I got to do really good in this last quarter of life. But I want to be part of something that can not only make these people relevant again, but make them in a position where the intrigue of the things that they did in their lifetime and the stories that can be told from that will capture a whole new generation of people, because there's so many just fascinating things that took place that you couldn't make them up. I mean, a team of writers could sit in a room and lock them in and put a gun to their head, and they couldn't make up the stuff that happened for real. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, wrestling is entertaining today, and I watch it with my kids, and we enjoy more of the I'm sure you've heard the AEW, where Cody just came from. We watch that a little bit more than the WWE, but it'll never ever be the same. And I know generations talk about that, how Mickey Mantle will never be the same as Aaron Judge or Mark McGuire, but truly wrestling will never be the same again for a lot of the reasons that we talked about today. I'm looking forward to the figures. During my conversation with Steve, he mentioned that there's going to be some focus on some guys that the way he put it, they created the stars. These were the guys that, you would defeat in 8 seconds on television. Some of the guys, and there's names for the enhancement workers, whatever you want to call it. But these guys are going to get some spotlight too. We were talking about Rocky King earlier. George South, I would think, could be a name for this line.
He's in it.
Yeah, all right, there you go.
He will be part of it. And to your point, it took everybody from the referees to the announcers to the guys that set up the ring. It took the whole army of people, to make this thing successful. The ones of us that got the quote unquote spotlight, some of us got more notoriety than others, obviously, but the folks that enable us to build our names and these bigger than life personalities on television absolutely deserve their spot, and so do the lady wrestlers of the 70s and 80s, and that weren't the Wendy Richters.
Right.
When it popped on and she got the first big pop with MTV and
right.
Cyndi Lauper and all that stuff. I mean, she got some good ink out of that, but there was a lot of ones before her that came through the system, and they had, they didn't get to go hang out in a territory for 6 months or a year. They generally had to work the circuit. The girls, the midgets, and Andre all used to kind of go around in a circle. They might come to your territory for 2 weeks, work the round, and then they were off to another one. And that was a tough life. It was like being a gypsy.
I think I'm thinking back to my 9-year-old, 10-year-old bedroom walls, and I think Misty Blue was maybe a poster on my wall, and maybe Baby Doll, and maybe Precious. So maybe those girls can get some attention with this line as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's going to be an equal opportunity for everyone to have their contributions recognized and brought out into the light, and have some light shined on them, and get a chance to tell their stories and have their personalities come across. Because our goal now is starting to build the social media presence and get a platform built where obviously we're going to be foretelling of the lines coming out and what they're going to be like. And I'm not so sure exactly what Steve told you, but like, we got great feedback after the introduction of the first 6. Yes. And those likenesses. But now after having feedback from from the collector, from the fan, from the enthusiast, you know, they're being tweaked to make them even better, because these are going to be, you know, on that par with the elite type figure that Mattel is capable of producing. And so the expectations are so high, you can't do generic anything. Things have got to be unique to those individuals, and people expect, you know, things to be of that quality. And certainly Steve and his background and all his contacts throughout the world in creating these things, and the artists on board. I've seen some renderings that they have done that are just blow your mind, what they're able to do and capture in a 3D sculpture. So I'm very excited to see it come to fruition. And I'll tell you my Mattel story.
Yes.
Mattel came to me 10 years almost, no, 7 years before my figure ever came out. So they came to me, I get a call. I remember sitting down in my kitchen, how excited I was. They sent me a check. They were going to do this, that, and the other. And I was supposed to be in the 7th series that they were doing. It was myself, Randy Savage, Andre, and somebody else. Well, series 1, 2, 3, and 4 started off so poorly that before it got to 7, they put everything on the back burner, and they had created the full rendering. They had a physical example. They had everything. So 5 years, the contract expired. And then WWE decided they wanted to go back into control of the figurine, the figure business. And they reached out to me and contracted me again, another 5-year deal to make that figure. And that's how it finally came to be. But it was a full 7 years from the time I initially signed till that thing came to fruition. So these, you know, we started dreaming this concept up, you know, basically last June, and you know, it's been a lot of scratching our heads and talking and working through you know, different concepts and different approaches. But before the end of this year has come, and certainly before Christmas, I feel like this first line will be in the consumer's hand, and I think it'll be something we all can be really proud of. I think the fans will be excited, and certainly long before that, we'll be making announcements about what's to follow. So I think we'll see a rhythm in 2023 that we'll be able to create some momentum, and certainly we'll have lots of mechanisms in place to tell these stories and make people give people the opportunities to become enchanted with some of these great legends and guys that paved the way for what the athletes are able to do today.
Or I can tell you the adult toy collector is a very, very interesting group of people, and there is a lot of buzz about these figures. The fact that when I talked with Steve, he teased some 200 signees already. You know, everybody is buzzing about that, and who could it be? You know, and some names have been discussed. It's going to be a great line. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to having your figure. I want to be respectful of your time, and I'll tell you this even on camera. This has been one of the best hours of my life. I said before we went on how big of a wrestling fan I was as a kid, and to be able to sit here with you and have this back and forth has been my honor entirely. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to talk with me.
Well, it's been a real pleasure, and I'm just excited about what the future holds. You know, my partners, Steve and Greg, certainly share the same passions that you do as a fan of the sport, and you know, what we can do to open doors for people that are really truly the pioneers of all this thing called wrestling is something that I'm really proud of.
Well, again, I can't thank you enough. I can't thank you enough for this time now, and I can't thank you enough for what you did to my life as a kid, and the memories that you created. So thank you very much, and I hope everything goes well for you. Thanks for hanging out with us.
It was my pleasure.